Next slide, please. Deltek. So you'll hear Deltek, you'll hear Costpoint. Technically, Deltek is the company and Costpoint is the application. We all call it Deltek. So it is, in the government contracting world, it really is kind of the gold standard for government contract finance. That is very much from the back end of the system. So as an example, you know, we have a contract with the Air Force that requires us to break down into 50 or 60 or 70 lines, each invoice, as to what was bought and who was using it and when it arrived and all of those kinds of things. That is very, very easy now. We can just literally, I mean, I'm not one to say, yo, you just hit a button and it kicks it out. It really does. You hit a button and it spits it out. That used to take a couple of days for us to generate when we were on the old Uninet system. So that's way easier. As I'm sure we've all logged into the timekeeping system, it is about as non-intuitive an application as you're going to find. So there are definitely, you know, pros and cons, but the team that use it, the contracts team, is in there all the time. So all of our contracts are logged into it, our funding, our subcontracts, and it has the ability to track individual contract clauses. So if a contract says that you need to submit an annual manpower report, like you might on DoD contracts, it notes that in there, so it will come back and remind you that you need to fill those out on an annual basis. It gets into that level of what FAR clauses are in your contract so that it can help you do that. The finance team, that's where all of our invoices, all of our financial reporting, all of our project level forecasting, all of our timesheets, our expense reports, managing our PTO balances, that's all in there, and that's what the finance team does. PMs, you're going to go in and review and approve timesheets. You're going to do expense reports, and you're going to get leave requests. I will tell you, as a PM, one of the areas that you'll find some complexity sometimes is we will do our timekeeping in Deltek. We will sometimes have a customer that also wants us to record our time in their system. That becomes a reconciliation task at the end of a reporting period where you got to make sure that our numbers line up with their numbers, and are our numbers, and are they, you know, which one's correct if there's a discrepancy. You'll also find some oddities sometimes where, for example, we might track time to the closest half of an hour, and we've had customers that wanted the quarter hour. And so now our system and their system don't match, and how do you invoice? So that's just a look, you know, as to how you might interact with it. If we go to the next slide. These are the major functions. The timekeeping is important. I mean, companies get in a lot of trouble if they don't keep time correctly. But so these are the different modules inside of the system. Next slide, please. So this is what our individual contracts look like. Everything is tabbed. Our labor rates, our overall funding, the labor category requirements, those all appear in the system. Next slide. Our reports on financials. This is an example of an old task order that we had. It tells you the project type and the overall costs, how much labor we build to it, how much we build the customer. Those are all automatically calculated based on our approved rates to the government. So it's this is the area where, as a project manager, you can find out what were my actual costs on the project, what's the profitability, and how to, you know, what's my funding look like. All contracts are different. Sometimes we buy a lot of materials. Sometimes we don't buy any. Sometimes we have subcontractors. Sometimes we don't have any. Sometimes the government will just give us, you know, $1 million, and that we have to operate against that. Sometimes they give us funding by individual line item, which can sometimes be a person. And so, as Brenda was talking about earlier, if you budgeted for somebody to take leave and they didn't, we might run out of money on a particular line item. So we might be able to invoice for most of the program, and we might have plenty of money left, but because the way they allocated it by individual person, we might be technically out of money and at risk for a particular category. So Deltek really helps with a lot of that. Next slide. The overall dashboards, a lot of different ways just to look at how much funding is left. And of note, especially for kind of the PM track, is you're supposed to notify the government when you're getting ready to run out of money, when you hit 75% expended. Deltek does a lot of that reporting automatically for you. Next slide. Then from an enterprise standpoint, it allows you to roll up multiple projects and put them in portfolios. And that's good if you have multiple task orders on one contract. It's good so that you can track how much money you might owe subcontractors. So it's got a lot of good analytics to it. Next slide, please. As far as notes, we picked it. We were on Uninet. Now, Uninet, I will tell you, was more user-friendly on the front end of the system, but we were having a lot of problems being able to keep up with the cost reporting, expenses. If we have expenses that are billable to the government, those have to go in a specific format. If we are doing travel, that has to go in a specific format. Uninet was having a lot of challenges with that. So Deltek is much more powerful with regard to all of that. It's harder to use for employees, and it's been harder to use for the finance team, frankly. I mean, we're all working through learning that. Future plans, we've got a program controller who's going to be starting, I believe, maybe as early as next week, who, the same way we have somebody who kind of just lives to run the iSIM system, we've got somebody that's going to really kind of live and operate the Deltek system that's going to be starting. And there are a couple modules that we aren't using right now. We might in the future. We'll see. That's kind of a ongoing evolution.